The low hum of the aircraft's engines blended with the occasional chime of the seat belt sign as the massive Boeing 777 cut through the darkness above the Pacific Ocean. It was a red-eye flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo, 13 hours of darkness stretching ahead. Half the cabin was already asleep, passengers buried under airline blankets, while the other half remained awake, lost in movies flickering on tiny screens or turning pages of paperback novels. First class had that rare atmosphere of hushed luxury, with dimmed amber lighting casting long shadows, gentle murmurs of conversation, and the occasional soft clink of crystal glassware as flight attendants moved silently through the aisles. Steven Seagal sat in seat 2A by the window, his imposing frame making the plush leather seat appear almost child-sized. One long, powerful arm rested against the armrest while the other casually turned the pages of a worn paperback thriller. At 60-something years old, his presence remained as commanding as ever. Those sharp, calculating eyes seemed to scan everything without really looking, every subtle movement deliberate and controlled, like a predator constantly aware of its surroundings. The years had added wisdom to his already formidable presence, and tonight, that experience would prove invaluable. Beside him in the aisle seat sat a tall man in his late 30s with close-cropped hair and a leather jacket that seemed uncomfortably tight across his shoulders. His left leg bounced with restless energy, a nervous habit he couldn't seem to control. His eyes darted around the first-class cabin far too often for someone supposedly on a routine international flight. Stephen noticed everything, of course. Decades of training and real-world experience had honed his observational skills to razor sharpness, but he kept reading, appearing completely absorbed in his book. Years of high-stakes situations had taught him the immeasurable value of patience and the power of appearing unaware while remaining hypervigilant. An hour into the flight, dinner service had concluded, and the cabin lights dimmed further to encourage sleep during the long journey across the Pacific. Most passengers had settled in for the duration, adjusting their seats, arranging pillows, and surrendering to the steady rhythm of the engines. The cabin had that peaceful quality that comes with nighttime flights, when the world below disappears into darkness and time seems suspended. That's when everything changed. The man beside Stephen shifted suddenly, his nervous energy transforming into something far more dangerous. His hand disappeared inside his leather jacket, and there was a small but unmistakable metallic click that cut through the ambient noise of the cabin like a knife. Stephen's eyes moved smoothly from his book to the object now visible in the man's trembling hand. A compact pistol, matte black with a professional-grade silencer attached. The weapon was small but deadly, designed for close-quarters work. The man held it low, angled directly toward Stephen's ribs, his other hand gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "You," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper but cold as winter steel. "Don't make a sound. Don't even breathe too loud." Stephen closed his book with deliberate calm and placed it carefully on the fold-down tray table, his movements slow and controlled. "That's not the best idea you've had tonight," he replied, his voice deep and measured, carrying the weight of absolute confidence. The man's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Shut up. I know exactly who you are. You think you're untouchable, some kind of legend, but right now you're just a man trapped in a seat 35,000 feet above the ocean." He leaned closer, the cold metal circle of the gun barrel pressing firmly into Stephen's side. "You're going to sit there and listen to everything I have to say, and if you so much as twitch in the wrong direction." Stephen's gaze didn't waver even slightly. "If I move, you'll regret it more than anything you've ever regretted in your entire life." The man sneered, clearly interpreting Stephen's calm demeanor as fear or submission. "I've been waiting months for this exact moment. You think you're some kind of action hero? Let's see just how tough the great Steven Seagal really is at 35,000 feet with nowhere to run." Stephen glanced casually toward the aisle, noting the flight attendants busy near the galley, completely unaware of the deadly drama unfolding in first class. A few passengers had begun to stir, perhaps sensing the tension in the air, but none seemed to have noticed the weapon yet. His eyes returned to study the gunman with clinical precision, taking in the set of his shoulders, the nervous twitch in his jaw, the barely perceptible tremor in his trigger finger. This wasn't a professional assassin or trained operative. This was someone running purely on adrenaline, ego, and probably desperation. "You're making several big mistakes," Stephen said quietly, his tone almost conversational. "First, you think that gun makes you in control of this situation. Second, you just revealed that you're nervous, which means you're unpredictable and dangerous to everyone on this plane. The man's grip tightened on the weapon. Nervous? I've got you exactly where I want you, exactly where I was told to get you. Steven's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, more unsettling than any scowl. And that's what makes it mistake number 3. You have absolutely no idea who you're really dealing with. The man frowned, genuinely confused by Steven's complete composure. In his experience, most people would be sweating profusely, begging for their lives, or at least trying desperately to talk their way out of the situation. But this calm, this unblinking, steel-eyed gaze, this absolute lack of fear was deeply unsettling, and not at all what he'd been prepared for. Steven's voice dropped to a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the cabin itself. Now, I'm going to give you exactly one chance to put that weapon away and walk back to your seat before you embarrass yourself in front of a plane full of innocent people. The man chuckled, but the sound lacked any real confidence. You're not in one of your movies now, Seagal. You don't have stunt doubles or special effects here. This is real life, and in real life, you bleed just like everyone else. Steven leaned back slightly in his seat, his eyes still locked on the man's face like a targeting system. Exactly. This is real life. And in real life, I don't need stunt doubles. The air between them grew thick with tension, the steady drone of the engines becoming almost deafening in the silence that followed. Passengers nearby began to sense something was wrong, though they couldn't yet see the weapon. The atmosphere in first class had shifted from peaceful luxury to something far more dangerous. And then the gunman made his final, fatal mistake. He glanced toward the galley for just a fraction of a second, checking to see if any flight attendants had noticed the confrontation. It was barely a moment, the briefest loss of focus, but it was enough. Steven moved with a speed and precision that defied his size and age. His hands shot out like striking cobras, one snapping to the gunman's wrist and twisting sharply while the other clamped down on the weapon itself. The pistol clattered to the floor, sliding under the seat in front of them with a metallic scrape. Before the man could even process what had happened, Steven's other hand had shot up to grip the back of his neck, forcing him face down into the armrest with controlled, but absolutely brutal force. The man let out a sharp grunt of pain and surprise, his free hand clawing desperately at Steven's iron grip. Passengers nearby gasped audibly, several standing up to see what was happening, their peaceful flight suddenly transformed into something from an action movie. Steven kept his voice calm, almost conversational, as he applied steady pressure. I told you that you'd regret it. The man squirmed beneath the hold, his earlier bravado evaporating as quickly as morning mist. You don't understand what this is about. Oh, I understand perfectly, Steven interrupted, his grip unwavering. I understand that you're approximately 2 seconds away from being unconscious if you don't settle down and start cooperating. The man immediately stopped struggling, his breathing ragged and panicked. Steven eased up slightly on the pressure, but maintained his firm grip, keeping the gunman completely controlled. Now you're going to sit there nice and quiet like a good little boy, Steven continued in that same calm tone. And when this plane lands in Tokyo, you're going to be handed over to the appropriate authorities. Do you understand me? The man nodded frantically, all the fight completely gone out of him. But Steven's instincts told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The way the gunman had looked at him, the way he'd spoken about being told to be here, it wasn't random. There was definitely more to this situation, and Steven intended to find out exactly what before the night was through. The cabin was buzzing now with nervous energy. Passengers craned their necks to see what had just happened, whispering in hurried, worried tones. A flight attendant, her face pale with shock, hurried up the aisle toward them, her professional training warring with obvious fear. Sir, is everything all right? What's happening here? Steven cut her off with a calm wave of his hand, his voice reassuring but authoritative. Everything's under control now. The seatbelt sign is still on, so let's keep everyone calm and in their seats. She hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at the man pinned in the aisle seat, then nodded and backed away toward the galley, probably to contact the captain. Steven's grip on the gunman's neck loosened slightly, but only enough to slide him back upright. The guy sat rigidly, rubbing his wrist where Steven had twisted it, his eyes darting nervously toward the front of the cabin. Now, Steven said, his voice dropping to that quiet growl again, why don't you tell me what this is really about? And don't even think about lying to me. The man clenched his jaw stubbornly. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Try me. A beat of heavy silence stretched between them. Then the man's eyes shifted almost imperceptibly, and Steven caught the subtle glance toward row 4. There, partially hidden beneath a dark hoodie, sat another man hunched over his phone, pretending to scroll through messages. His posture was all wrong, shoulders tense, jaw clenched in concentration. Steven filed that crucial detail away for later use. "You're not here by accident," Steven stated flatly, not asking a question. The man said nothing, his lips pressed into a tight line of defiance. Steven leaned closer, his imposing presence filling the man's personal space completely. "You pointed a loaded weapon at me in a pressurized cabin at 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. You're either incredibly stupid, or someone with serious resources is pulling your strings like a puppet." A faint, humorless smirk crept across the man's bruised face. "Maybe both." Steven's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Who's your friend in row for?" The smirk faltered noticeably. "Doesn't matter. You're not making it to Tokyo alive." That was the absolute last straw. Steven gripped the man's collar firmly, forcing his gaze forward and speaking directly into his ear. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice like grinding gravel. "The only way you're leaving this aircraft before we land in Tokyo is if I personally throw you out at cruising altitude." The man's Adam's apple bobbed visibly as he swallowed hard, finally understanding the magnitude of his situation. Steven released him suddenly and stood to his full, intimidating height. He reached under the seat ahead, retrieved the fallen pistol, and slipped it smoothly into his own jacket. "Congratulations," Steven said with grim satisfaction. "You just became my personal problem for the next 8 hours."